The following audio is made up of clips I have spliced together from Katrina's interview. They are not in the order that she spoke about them. My intention by putting them in this order is to create a short chronological narrative that allows themes to emerge, to start weaving threads and see what patterns pop out. To listen to Katrina's full interview, you can find the link in the description. Please enjoy.
So my mom was from Mexico, and they grew up really, really poor. Like when we went to go see where they lived, like the ground was dirt. There were sheets on ropes to kind of make dividers. There's a hole in the ground to go to the bathroom, things like that. And her mom died when she was 5. And so she didn't, and then she had sisters, but they got split up when the mom died. And then my mom came to the United States. Actually, that's also an interesting story. She was only 5 or 6 years old when her mom passed away. And immediately after that, her brother, who was older in his 20s, who she hadn't met, got wind, and that they needed to split the kids up. There was a couple of younger ones, and so he was on the other side of the border in El Paso, Texas, with his engine running and the trunk open. And my mom and her sister devised a plan where her sister would distract border patrol, and my mom just pretended to be getting fruits from the people on the strip, that were selling, the local vendors. And then she just booked it across the border, across the bridge, across the border, jumps into her brother's trunk. And I just always think about how brave you had to be to do that. You just had no idea. You're leaving the life you've ever known, running to somebody you don't even know. So there's that. But it just kind of tells you a sense of her resilience and her fire to seek a good life for herself, even at that age. So she's traveling around. She's going to these different places, doing the farming work. And I think what happened for her was that the churches where she found mothers that would mother her.
And how old was she again at this time?
5 or 6.
5 or 6. Okay.
Yeah, and so between 5 or 6 all the way until 15, 16, I would say, because I think she got married when she was 16. So all that was, kind of just going around. But she said she never had home. And so the one common denominator was whatever church she went to, she would find women who would love on her, teach her how to cook, show her how to make tamales, or, just nurture her in ways that she was hungry for without her sisters and without her mom. And so I think that's where that came from, was just feeling like her faith was really, really strong. And so that's why she kept going to church and seeking that out. And then I think it just became a natural way for her. So for her journey, to come here and then work the fields, and then find my dad, who she ultimately, she was traveling with her brother and working fields all around the United States. And then she landed in Colorado in a small border town called Julesburg. And so she didn't know any English, and my dad didn't know any Spanish, but they had this instant attraction. And so they had one date in the town cemetery, and then the second date they decided they were going to get married. And so they had to drive and travel across states and lie about their age and all of that to get married. And I don't know how they navigated life in that way, one not knowing Spanish, one not knowing English. So I think my dad knew a little bit of Spanish. He's full Mexican too, but he was born an American citizen. And so anyways, they grew up very poor. And so to my mom, it felt like to be able to own that house on Cesar Chavez, to be a homeowner. And then it was, it's a very modest home, but from where she came from, and even where she raised her kids in the small shack on the farm, while my dad was doing farm work and she was raising the kids, they were just very poor. And so when she got here and was able to buy a home, be the only people to live in that home ever, it was just dirt, and they, built it, and they didn't build it with their own hands. They hired people to build it. But it was a big deal to her. And so she just really felt deeply that she needed to somehow help people but stay under the radar because she's undocumented. And that was the way for her to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so I was raised by my paternal grandparents, and so we were very close growing up. We were really connected in the community. Really, my mom worked at El Burrito, and it was a mom and pop shop. She worked there, and she was undocumented until until Clinton was in office. So she really wanted to give back to community, and so what she did was, she was known as the lady in the blue house, La Señora de la Casa Azul, and so people would knock on our door all the time randomly, and we always kept a coat closet in the front with all different sizes of coats, because when you tell people from the south that it's cold in the north, it's not like hoodie cold, it's like parka cold. So she always kept coats, and she would have people come, they would knock on the door because they heard word of mouth, and she would pray for them, she would feed them, she'd give them coats, and then she'd send them to El Burrito to get food on her account. And oftentimes she did that so much that she didn't get a check. So that was her way of community tithing. That's what she called it. And then later on, down the road a little bit, my dad, so these are my paternal grandparents that I'm referring to as mom and dad. So my dad then, he knew what it was like to have to start over again, over and over and over in his life. And so he built a shed, and my mom would still be La Señora de la Casa Azul, but this was like the houseless community. And lots of times they would get deported or put in detox. And so my dad built the shed for their belongings. So if they went to detox, they could come back out and get their stuff. Or if they were deported and could somehow find a way to get to us, her number was the same her whole life. So they would call on a house phone, and if they could. Otherwise, so that's what they did. And my mom would restore dignity in our houseless community, because she would give them jobs like rake the leaves, or the snow, or trash removal, or whatever it was. And so they would come, she would pray for them, and then she would feed them and give them some bucks, and they would do this chores for her. Yeah. So my very first memory ever, I was 4 years old, and my biological parents are, I want to tell you, like 10th and 11th grade, or 10th and 12th grade. They're in high school, early, very, very young. My mom is white, and her family is so racist that they disown her for getting pregnant with me. And then my dad, he's like, it's the 70s, and he's this beautiful dark brown, and he's got a big afro, and so they thought he was black, and the dad chased him around the table with a shotgun, threatening to kill him if he ever came back, for getting her pregnant. Not just getting her pregnant, but getting her pregnant with they called it color person seed. And then I think that's why my biological grandparents, my paternal grandparents, stepped in. They're just like, no, we're not doing this. But so my very first memory, now I told you about, she's white, he's brown, it's the 70s, so they call themselves free-loving hippies, they told me. And so my very first memory was on 52. I was in the car with them. I was about 4. I didn't know I was 4 until I talked to my mom and told her, my biological mom, and told her my memory. And she was like, how could you possibly remember that? You were 4. So we're on 52, It's my dad driving. It's his friend who happens to be a white guy. He's sitting in the back with me. No seatbelts at that time. And my mom's sitting in the front. And there's a car behind us. We're on 52. At the time it was called Lafayette Bridge. And so I remember that we picked up this friend and that somebody behind us was flashing their lights violently. And so my dad, the story goes that my dad thought maybe he had a flat tire or something was going on. So they pulled over to the side of the road, and it happened to be some guys who identified as skinheads, and they did not like that my dad was with her, and so they pulled him over, and then they pursued to jump him, not realizing that his best friend's in the back seat or that there was a bat in the back seat. So my mom comes and like pushes me down under the seat and covers me up, and they're fighting. My dad ends up getting like a broken nose, but apparently they were pretty good fighters. And so my very first memory was racism. But even when I was in utero, there was racism, right? Because, and then growing up, I had very little contact with my mom's family because they were, like I said, because they're hateful, racist. They were addicts. They were, bikers that were dangerous, just living dangerously, like getting drunk and high and riding around on motorcycles while you carry so much rage and hate is dangerous. So they would call me things like Beaner Baby and stuff like that. And so my time with her family was limited, but I always stayed in contact with my mom. Sometimes I even lived with her here and there.
I guess, yeah, I'm curious how, like, with her family being, like, so kind of racist, like, outwardly, like, was she just, like, more of a rebel, or she just, like, met your bio
my
dad?
Dad's pretty good looking.
he's just a charmer.
Yes. No, so I don't know if she dabbled and then got pregnant and didn't like plan for that to happen. Well, obviously she didn't plan to be a teen mom. But I never saw her. She had a few relationships. They were all long relationships, but they were all white men. So I don't know if she was a rebel or if my dad really was just like suave and debonair and like, good looking and could knock your socks off. I don't know.
Yeah.
Always very grateful that she made the decision to let my grandparents raise me, because I learned my culture, I learned my language. I was submerged into like this community tithing alignment of values, church friends that I made, and then just like my life took a whole different way than I think it would have had I been raised with her and her family. I have memories of going to Mexico, and I have memories of my quinceañera and things like that I don't know that my biological mom ever really identifies that I'm not just white. I think maybe that's a pain point for her.
Interesting.
Because maybe maybe I'm the reason that she wasn't able to be close to her family for a while. Mine became kind of advocacy, support. It's, I've worked in working with houseless folks, working with women and kids in transitional housing, working with young Latino kids about sexual health and treatment centers, prisons, things like that. And so I think that because she planted that seed, I knew how to put my own flavor on it. And then my kids did too. So it's kind of been going generation after generation.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time you did some sort of community project or, stepped into the community?
I think even as a young person, it was this natural space. And so I remember being in high school and being part of what was called Teens Networking Together. And so one of the things I remember was like we provided sober cab, which was at that time was unheard of. And so it was like on New Year's Eve, because we knew it was a big party time, to prevent any drinking and driving or accidents, we just set up shop. There was a hotline number you called, and then people, adults in our lives used their own cars, and the teens kind of went with. And so I remember doing sober cab. I also remember doing, at that time, it would have been the early 90s, and so we were doing AIDS awareness. Again, it wasn't like really well known, and at that time people were still dying. It was like a death sentence. And so we did a lot of work with folks who were, struggling with, not struggling, living with AIDS. And, so we did a lot of different things. I joined some kind of program for single moms, and I ended up landing a job at the YWCA of St. Paul. And I was working with their transitional housing program. So they had 3 different sites in St. Paul, and it was moms and their kids, and they would teach like cooking or parenting classes, or how to do an interview, those types of skills. And so we did that. Then an opening came up for what they were launching was like a pilot program called the Family Intervention Program, where I worked with young people who had like IEPs, or had like probation officers, or maybe open child protection cases. And so I became the liaison between the family and the school, and then whatever entity that third thing was, probation officer, whatever. Did that for a while, and then I worked as a case manager for a transitional housing program in Maplewood, where it was on site. There's only 13 families that lived there, but they all had dual diagnoses, so it was like mental health and chemical addiction. And so I remember one of my people, she relapsed. She had her drug dealer at the house, and then he stabbed her. And then I had to try to figure out what to do with her 4 kids. So she's in the hospital healing, and I'm trying to call her family, who's all in Chicago. And so I'm trying to navigate, like, how to care for these kids until these people from Chicago come and this and that. Anyways, that's when I took a break from all, like, that type of work. So then what I did was a call center.
Okay.
I just really wanted nothing to do with matters of the heart.
Yeah, I think that it's a pretty common story for people who get started in that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it's very intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I took that break, and that would happen a couple times in my life. So I took that break. I worked at a call center, and then got called back to the life. So now I'm 23, and I'm just had the twins. Those 2.
Okay.
They're 5 years apart, Ariel and the twins.
Okay.
And so now fast forward 5 years, and I'm at the part where I'm working at single room occupancy men's shelter downtown St. Paul, which was a gig that I really was excited to be back into. I got kind of hired because I could speak Spanish and help interpret with case managers. And so I worked there, and then I ended up, getting other jobs through that route, working with houseless folks. I knew I wanted to feel like I was making a difference in my work, whatever I was doing. But it was really hard to navigate that because there was always this call to go back to school, not my own authentic call, but that the world was telling me that unless I have some kind of degree or letters after my name, I should accept that I'm going to be lower wealth and that other people that are doing the same job as me, like, are entitled to better pay because they went to school. So I suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome too once I started getting these jobs, because at that time people didn't care. There was no word for like lived experience or no value to it for sure. It was just nope, degree.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of emphasis on the higher education.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, it sounds like you were able to do that work anyway, but then everyone's still kind of telling you to go back to school.
Yeah. So it was like I felt lucky to be in these roles where, you know, other folks were more like there was a factory that they worked at, and I did factory work before too, or they, you know, they did cleaning or they did whatever it was. And so for me, I just felt really honored to be able to work with people and feel like I was making a difference. And so at that time, I just took whatever they paid me because I felt like the balance was fine. And when I would try to like get promoted or take on more responsibility, and when I was given no after no, it was kind of just like I was shut down, and I accepted it because I didn't have a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it was a different world, and now it's so much better to know that more and more places really do see lived experience as valuable, and that, I mean, it's not perfect, right? Like, I'm looking for jobs now, and I'm just like, what do you pay, and what degree did you expect people to have, and what do you expect? You know, I mean, I see jobs that are like, you know, $16 or $18 an hour, but they want you to have like a bachelor's degree and be able to boom, 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 and have this many years of experience and speak another language. You're like, okay. Or you could go work at Amazon and, you know what I mean, not have to have those things. It's awful. But it's been my experience that every time I get to level up, we'll call it, it's always because another woman sees something in me and takes a chance on me, and then I get to that, like, kicks that door down. She'll like lift me up, and then I'll lift somebody else up, and it's just been, that's how my career has worked for me. So I mean, yeah, that kind of connection is really like deeply woven into me and my values.
So specifically, like women, supporting women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been specific. In my story, anyways, it was always a woman. For example, I was working at Family Tree, and I wanted to be a sexual health educator, but it was so small at the time. There was 2 educators, and that was all there would ever be. So there was never going to be any time or any space unless one of them quit for me to become an educator. And so my boss at the time knew that Planned Parenthood was hiring a sexual health educator, and even though she didn't want me to leave, she did know that that was my dream. And so she's the one who connected me to them and, you know, did the referral and stuff for me. Then the woman there said that my interview was fine, but that they wanted to go with somebody who had degrees, and she was going to be my supervisor, so she fought for me. And so that's kind of like an example of how that cycle went. Or like, I remember I was at Wesco, and I was in the Black Indigenous Women of Color table, and there was another woman on the west side who worked at the mayor's office. And so she really wanted to work with me, but they also went with somebody who had a degree. That didn't work out, and so about 6 weeks later, she contacts me and says, hey, are you still available? I'm going to make this happen. And so even though I didn't have a degree and the role called for a degree, because she fought for me, I got to get in and work at the city. So it's just kind of been a trend in my life I'm really lucky to have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. And are these all, I mean, I guess not necessarily local to the west side, but local to the Twin Cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say there's like sort of a strong community drive in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, I think that, I think people really do want to see, like, lift each other. At least in my world, I'm really lucky to have that kind of, like, bubble around me, or, like, my orbit is like-minded folks. I don't have a lot of folks, at least at this point in my life, I don't have a lot of folks who are, values don't align, we'll say that.
Yeah.
And now that we're talking about it, every one of these women were either queer or women of color, and so from marginalized communities, that's also something to point out too, that it's not just women, but women from marginalized communities that are trying to create space for me to be able to be there. And then, supporting me so that I could be successful there too. That's that part two of it.